WCUR, I'm here with John Connor.
How you doing?
We have a big phone call with us right now. I'm going to put him on right now. He is the veteran voice of the Octagon. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Mr. Bruce Buffer himself.
Love Radio.
Hello, Bruce, you're live.
How you guys doing?
Good, man. How about yourself?
I'm doing really well. A little jet lag from the old Vegas rust and dust, but nothing to complain about. It was a really fun weekend.
Wow.
But things happen. That's okay.
Okay, let's get into it. Basically, let's just talk a little bit how you got into it, because you are now known as the veteran voice of the Octagon, but we just want to know how you got started into that, what it came about. Were you born, and once you hit, your teenager, did you like, okay, I got this voice, I'm going to be the voice veteran of the Octagon? How exactly did it happen?
No, it wasn't quite so, clear path or simple as that. And basically, I'll tell you guys, Random House Publishing, they're the biggest publisher in the world. They're releasing my memoirs and my autobiography at Christmas of this year to March of next year, sometime in there. And I'll be done writing in about 5 months. But I really go into that because it's a very elaborate story and it would take a long time to go through. But in a nutshell, I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. I've been involved in boxing. My grandfather was champion of the world. I basically came out of the womb. My dad had me watching boxing, as much as possible and teaching me fighting techniques even when I was 4 and 5 years old. And then putting me into the realm of martial arts with my first judo, my first foray, which was into judo. And I've always been in the fighting world, but in 1986 or so, this pretty boy came out on TV when boxing was really taking off. And he would do this great announcing and have this James Bond-like image, and his name was Michael Buffer, and I'm like, who is this guy, right? Yeah. And I'm such a huge fan of boxing and watching Tyson, like, all of us back then, that, like, people possibly even who watched me doing what I do now in the UFC was saying things like I was saying, which is, man, that guy's got a great job. I mean, best seat in the house, watches his favorite sport, must be paid a lot of money, and, God knows what girls he gets to meet, and this, that, and the other, and travels the world. I'm thinking, how cool is that job? It turned out that was my brother. I never knew I had a brother in Michael Buffer. I have a brother named Brian I grew up with, but Michael is my half-brother. And I met him about 25 years ago, and about 4 years after that, I took over his career and trademarked those famous 5 words and built him and the phrase into what it is today, along with him. We've been partners that whole time. So that was the foray, and then I put him in the UFC because I was putting him in every hot sport up and coming, event, whatever was, playoffs for the NFL, World Stanley Cup, the World Series, you name it. I got on the phone, I made it happen, and I started putting Michael in every form of sports and entertainment. So then, you remember the WCW Wrestling League?
Yeah. Ted Turner.
Okay. Well, I had a big contract for Michael and Matt, and I used to go to a lot of the wrestling shows, which was fun. I'm not a huge fan, but I really respect what these guys go through because they do put on a show, and they do get hurt. It's not real fighting, but it is what it is, right? So when he first came out in the UFC, in UFC 6, we were in Casper, Wyoming, when Tank Abbott came on the picture, and that was my first UFC I ever went to, was UFC 6. So basically he came out, and they had him say, if it's not in the Octagon, it's not real. Well, when he said that, I knew I was going to get a call or have to deal with the WCW the next week, because back then they wanted everybody to think wrestling was real. This was before it was called sports entertainment.
Right.
So I had to make a decision. We had a 3-fight deal with the UFC. Michael could not have continued to do all the UFCs with everything else I had him doing, so it was time to just make a decision that the money was in WCW, because they were paying a boatload, of money at the time, and that was the obvious decision. And it took me about a year to convince the UFC that I should be their announcer, but they didn't really listen to me, because the way I got in is, you remember a fighter named Scott the Pitbull Ferrazzo?
Yeah, vaguely, I do.
Okay, well, he was back in the old days. He had a real battle with Tank Abbott, which they both, kind of lowered themselves recently and fought in some bars, some backyard somewhere for God knows, how much money. But that was then, and this is now. Anyway, I managed him into Puerto Rico, into UFC 8, and I convinced the owner, and I said, look, I'm flying down with my fighter. I'm bringing my tux. Let me announce the prelims. Let me show you what I got. And he agreed. I did them. They didn't hire me. They called me back for UFC 10. I did the whole show. I thought they were going to hire me after that. I fly to New York, take them out for drinks, whatever the case might be. They didn't hire me. Then they called me and asked me to be on Friends and co-star as myself. And this is like 2 years into this now. And I finally said to myself, you know what? It's time to play the best poker hand I could ever play. I said to the owner, meet me on the set. I'll do it. And I wound up co-starring as myself with Tank Abbott and John McCarthy. And I just told him, I said, look, this is the biggest comedy on TV. You've got me playing myself. Let's make a deal. Let's stop screwing around. Otherwise, I'm done. Not even going to ask you ever again. And we made a deal right there, and I've announced every show except for one in Japan since then.
So where did your famous 2 words come from?
I was never phrase-driven because my brother, you know, he's the legendary great announcer of all time, and I never wanted to be Frank Sinatra Jr., but I wanted to do it my way, shall we say. Kind of a play on words there, but I was never phrase-driven. I used to come out in the beginning and I would say things like, this is how he started the show, you know, it's time to begin the Ultimate Fighting Championship, you know, when I go on this big, long, drawn-out thing. Mm-hmm. And it's time to begin was what I floated with for years. And then it just finally came down to it's time, because to me, we sat there for 5 hours, the main event's happening now, these guys have trained for 6-8 weeks of their life, we've been publicizing, marketing it, it all comes down to this one final moment of the show, it's time, this is it, it's time. So, like I say, it's not what I say, it's how I say it. That's the way I announce. So I announce with passion, I announce for fun, I never rehearse, I just go out and do what I do and have a great time doing it, and when that starts to fade away, then I will step away.
What about some of the fighters' names? Because me and John, we both like Anderson Silva. I was a huge fan of Wanderlei Silva. Is that the same way too, or do you prep those? Because they're really good.
If you notice that, I think I'm different than other announcers in many ways, and sometimes I get very raw and not guttural, but just I'm really digging deep and bringing out these names. So the whole show, from the first preliminary to the main event, is a build-up. If you watch the way I announce, you'll see that everything from a 45-degree turn, which becomes a 90-degree turn, which culminates into the 180 in the main event, the tempo of the voice, the movement, whether I stand center or I walk over and we're face-to-face, eye-to-eye, you know, sometimes nose-to-nose if it's Dan Hardy in there or something. It's just all how the moment feels, guys. It's the energy off the crowd, but it is a build-up. Everything I do is a build-up from the first prelim, which is usually 10 or 12 fights, to the final fight. It's not show business, babe. It's showbiz. That's all I can tell you.
What's your vocal warm-up routine like? Because I mean, is it comparable to a singer's routine, or did you kind of have to create your own because you do sort of shred your vocal cords on those some of those yells?
Well, I mean, I'm fine after. I'm ready to do another show if they ask me to. I mean, when I'm sick, which happens, you know, often being on the road the way all of us are. You know, I've done the show with laryngitis, 104-degree temperature.
Wow.
Blown ACL, which I blew announcing George St. Pierre and 129 in Toronto.
You're kidding.
Wow.
Yeah, that's all be in the book, but when I announced George, he walked out. I'd already done like a jumping 180, and I did a 360 spin, and, you know, it all came out because it was such a big show. I wanted to really just get the crowd going. And George, when I went over, I said, "George, rush," and then he stepped out towards me, and I bunny hopped back. And I did about a 1.5-foot bunny hop, and I had rolled my ankle about 5 days before. I couldn't stand on my leg 3 days before the show. And finally I was able to stand up, and I had actually wrapped my ankle for the show, but when I jumped back, my foot didn't land correctly because of the bad ankle, and my knee blew.
Oh, geez.
So it was like, "George, rush, say, yeah," you know, like that. But you know what? It was like Robert De Niro in Raging Bull. You didn't put me down, Ray. You know, I mean, I stood up, but when I went over and put the microphone underneath Herb Dean's arm, my knee was going side to side, and I had that face on, you know, like, you know, holding it stern for the fighters because this is their moment. But inside my head, I'm going, "Holy, you know what? You just blew your, you know what, knee." That's all that was going on in my head. And now here's the funny part. I braced it up for 2 months because there was no room to get my ACL replaced. And at my age, you got to have a cadaver's Achilles tendon put in your knee.
Right.
So I told him, I said, "Fine, look, here's the date. We got 2 months of UFCs. I got a 4-week window. I'll miss the World Series of Poker main event because we'll get the knee done. And then I got to be in Philadelphia 4 weeks later to do the UFC." And Dr. Elatrosh, who operated on Tom Brady for the Patriots,
Okay.
Did his knee, did my knee. Lo and behold, George blows his knee recently, and I'm over rehab for a follow-up, and who walks in but George? And who operated on George but my doctor?
Wow.
Is that a funny situation? So George never knew. I said, "George," he goes, "What are you doing here?" I said, "George, didn't you hear?" He didn't stop laughing for 10 minutes.
Really?
So you never even let on to them that you had blown your knee when it happened?
No, I'm not fighting, boys. You know, I'm there doing my job. If I elect to do something and I'm the one that did it to myself, that's my problem. I didn't look for the UFC to pay my medical bills. I'm out $20,000 to get this whole thing done, but that was my choice. But I had a great doctor. I'm 7 months in. I'll be surfing again in a month. I got a little air last Saturday night when it's time because I wanted to test the knee, and everything worked out fine. So I'm training with a great guy that trained John Jacques Machado, the grand jiu-jitsu artist, and we really are working on my legs. He got me in shape for the operation, so I really am going through this pretty well.
What would you say is your most memorable moment so far in UFC that you've done as the voice of the Octagon?
It's like when you realize the fact that I've been announcing now for 16, 17 years,
Jeez.
and that I've done every single UFC fight in that time except for UFC Japan 2, you got to appreciate the fact that I've probably forgotten more than I can remember. And so it's a moment. I think I've had a great moment. Another great moment comes around. But I'll just tell you quite frankly, and this is not even a fighting moment, the greatest moment in the history of this sport was not the call that I got from Robert Meyerowitz, the previous owner, telling me that Dana and Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta bought the UFC, but the night that they took us all out to dinner to tell us their plans, and I could see the passion that was in these guys. And I knew that all my dreams of where this sport and this event could go and to benefit the fighters to make as much money as possible and to give the fans as much entertainment as they so justly deserve as possible, that these were the mavericks of business that were going to get us there. That was the greatest moment because it's panned out into many great moments since then. So it's really a non-fighting moment for me. It was a point in history, a turning point to where we were either going underground and we were going to disappear, or we're here talking now as we are. And the reason we're doing that is because of Dana White, Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta, and nobody can convince me of anything otherwise. They're making the way for everybody in the sport.
I got to say, though, your introduction of Randy Couture and Mark Coleman, that gave me chills, and I know Joe Rogan said the same on the air.
I appreciate that. When you introduce Captain America, and you're an announcer, and you got as much meat as he provides in his bio, and then I remember I was in Portland, and I gave him the bow, and the fans, every time I could pick my nose, they'll call it the buffer pick, but it's like they call it the buffer bow, and I was honored by that because there's nobody else I'll do that for. It's going to take years before somebody else deserves that. And not saying that anybody's not a great fighter or a great person, because there's so many of them. But Randy's royalty to me, and what do you do when you're standing in front of a king or a queen? You bow, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
So with the recent UFC pay-per-view, there's been some back and forth regarding the decision in the Condit Diaz fight, and Diaz taking the first 2 rounds, Condit taking the rounds 3 and 4, and then some pundits giving Diaz the 5th. What do you think of the fight outcome?
Well, I really enjoyed the fight. I found I was watching Carlos, obviously with my cage side seat, and he obviously was following a game plan to the T. Got a little perplexed a couple times. But when you look at how he punched in, he'd get up against the cage. Diaz would get him up against the cage. He would punch out, like a boxer punches out of a corner. And he'd just punch out. He would hit Diaz on the way out. Inside, the quick elbows, the taking apart. Yes, I can say all you want about leg kicks, but leg kicks rake up points, and they are leg kicks. And I have to watch it on TV, but I had it 2-2 going into the 5th round, and I had slight surprise, but no real problem reading off the decision. And I understand Diaz's frustration, absolutely.
Has there ever been a decision that caught you off guard before you had to deliver it?
Hell yeah. That's what I'm the messenger, man. Don't shoot me. I'm just doing my job.
What do you make of Diaz's claim that he doesn't need this? Any chance he'll actually follow through and retire?
I've really become a huge fan of Nick's, and I like his brother Nate a lot. They're actually a couple really cool guys when you understand, who they are. I'm not into the throwing the bird and the fingers and all that. I'm very much against that. I'll publicly go. I've always said that. I just don't think that is classless. But the thing about these guys is you got to respect where they are, and that was an emotional moment for Nick. And Nick's an emotional guy. Nick carries his. It's on his shoulder. You can see it. You can see who Nick is. So that's kind of like BJ. To me, that's like BJ Penn saying he's retiring. There's no guarantees there. But I can understand where Nick is coming from.
Yeah, that kind of took me off guard when BJ announced his retirement. That's kind of
same.
Watching another one, not of Randy's stature, but still, he's been around long enough to be considered, way up in that class.
When this all comes down to any final Hall of Fame moment in the years to come, to not allow a BJ Penn to share that dais with all the other great fighters. BJ is a legend in the sport and a legend in the UFC. So what else can I say about BJ Penn?
Now, what do you see as Condit's chances taking on a healthy GSP?
Well, I talked to George that night because we were at the after party together, and he thinks that the Condit fight. George is actually going to be on my podcast today, which is live at 2 on SureDog.com.
Okay.
And I have George and Rashad Evans on. George is in rehab. He's going to let me know when he can talk when he's on the bike. He's going to come on, and we're going to talk about that. And but I George thinks that the style matchups of him and Condit will make for a really good fight. But I know that George really wanted to fight GSP. George really wanted to fight Nick Diaz, and that can still happen. That's not a dead fight.
I know you just spoke about the podcast. What else do you do when you're not inside the octagon? What other projects are you doing outside?
Too much, at least according to the loved ones that don't get to see me that often. I'm writing the book. I'm making a big announcement here, which is not a secret as I tweeted it out, but I am starting It's Time Industries, which is going to be a clothing line company, not just for MMA, it's for all sports and all active people. And basically this company, with the grand partners I have, which I can't mention names yet, is going to rival Under Armour. We're going to go after the Under Armour Nike formula.
Wow.
And I'm not just talking T-shirts and stuff. I'm talking, eventual shoes and bags and the whole 9 yards. It's got a great logo. It's Time, to me, is all about, like I said, the moment, doing your best. It's kind of like, the call to arms, that kind of thing, as far as the way I live my life. It's always about time to perform and to do your best, and that's what this whole concept about this is going to be. There was Just Do It is out there doing its thing. Well, watch out, Just Do It, because it's time. I'll show you what I'll do in this company in 3 to 4 years. Talk to me in 3 to 4 years, and you'll remember this call.
Just trying to pick off the little guys, huh? Nike and Under Armour?
If I'm going to do something, I'm going to do something, okay? I just don't want to be another T-shirt company out there, with all respect to everybody that's doing it, because I don't have the time and I don't have the want to do something that's going to just be another thing to do. I got so many things to do that I can't do them all, and I have to make choices. And I mean that both in personal and business, because at this point in my life, time is of the essence. I mean, time goes by so fast. So I want to make sure I'm the most productive with the choices I make. This is going to be a very grand choice.
Absolutely. I can't empathize with you there more. I think that's so awesome that you're just going after it, and you're not setting out a small goal of releasing like 3 or 4 T-shirts.
Right. There's always a million reasons not to do something, but there's always one real good one why you should.
Yeah, I mean, it's listen, guys. Anything you want to do in life, I don't care how small or how big. If you set up to do it, you believe you can do it. You write it down on paper to make sure you know what you're doing. You can achieve anything you want. And the matter of success is not about who makes the most money. It's about who does the best at what they do. So I have respect for I'm no better than anybody else. I just choose certain paths, and I think that's true of all of us. But I'm not going to sell the clothes to the public for probably 6 to 9 months. I'm just going to put them on people that we see out in the public place, from NFL, NBA, hip-hop stars. I can go on and on. And, of course, our beautiful world of MMA. And then when everybody gets out there and sees it and sees how cool it's going to be, then, boom, I'll open up the floodgates and you can start purchasing stuff.
Have you lined up any athletes already?
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
I have a question from one of my friends who's a big fan, and he said, "Hey Bruce, I see you've been working out. Who are you training with from the MMA? I want to know right now, because apparently for your age you're in really good shape, and he wants to know because he's an older gentleman who's not quite the same shape."
Thanks, no problem. Well, the first key thing to staying in shape is nutrition. Is the way you take care of yourself, okay? If you're going to be pounding back the barley pops and, slapping down the hamburgers and the cheeseburgers and pizza every night and day, you're going to have a problem staying in shape. But you can still enjoy all that in moderation. So nutrition is number 1. Training is number 2 in respect to, how we look. And I've been an athlete my whole life. I pretty much have always been in shape my whole life. I've been a surfer, been martial arts my whole life. So it's just a lifestyle for me. My trainer is Flavio Olivera, which is the trainer, as I mentioned earlier, for he's trained people like actors like Ted Danson, directors like Ridley Scott. That's fine there, but he trains athletes, and he trains Jean-Jacques Machado, the famous jiu-jitsu guy.
Right.
And he has trained fighters too, and he's an ex-fighter himself. He's a crazy mercenary type from Brazil, and he just keeps me going. He beats me down. And then Waleed Ismail, you know who he is?
No, I don't know that name.
He runs Jungle Fight. He's one of the original Vale Judo guys, and we do striking workouts together and some street jiu-jitsu, I call it. I'm not interested in going in the dojos now at my age just to get belts and stuff. My idea of training is to stay in shape, and, you know, if I ever have to turn to on the street, so I call it, you know, teach me some street jiu-jitsu.
One of my other questions from a fan was maybe someone that you could. He said, hey, Jimmy Lennon Jr. in the octagon, who would win between him and you?
Do I really have to answer that? I mean, come on, have some trust in your voice of the octagon. The Voto's going to stand tall for everybody. Jimmy's going down. Let me tell you something about Jimmy. Jimmy's a very cool guy. Classy, classic announcer. I would never even think about laying a hand on Jimmy Lennon. But that's not a bet. I mean, come on, guys.
I don't know why he said that. He didn't even say the boxing. He said in the octagon, and I said, well, maybe that's an unfavorable advantage. And he's like, no, it's not. He's like, this is where it's got to happen. And I was like, just ask him, please. And I said, okay, fine, I'll ask him.
Yeah, no, Jimmy's such a sweetheart, man. I tell you, he really is a nice guy. The last thing I could ever even think about doing would be laying a hand on Jimmy Lennon.
Now, the UFC in general has seen a bunch of growth with the new partnership with Fox. Do you think this is what it's going to be to finally get UFC right into every household to finally reach that that pinnacle, or is there still more?
I honestly don't. Short of Chuck Liddell acting like Santa Claus and going down the chimney of every house in the United States, I don't know any other way to better what is now happening with Fox. I mean, what better thing could possibly happen? You've got the biggest network in the world, or in the United States rather, now backing you, paying you boatloads of money, and running all the shows, The Ultimate Fighter, and the ability to be in all the different stations. It's going to bring millions of new eyeballs into the sport. The thing that needs to happen now is that we need just to provide, as we've been providing, even with, when it's not, a full-on home run hit, is to provide great entertainment, for the people watching, to bring them in. So Fox will bring them to the table. It's up to the UFC and us all together as a team to provide the entertainment that'll make them want to come back to that table. So that's the mission now.
Some people criticize the UFC for adding Strikeforce, another group under their billing and everything, and creating more dominance over other not UFC brands, but for MMA brands. But I think I personally agree with the move. I really like it. I think it adds a little bit more parity between the different weight classes. There's not just one and two guys running around dominating everything.
Right.
Well, let me ask you guys a question, and it's a very obvious question. What organization out there, including Strikeforce, if it wasn't bought by the UFC, is going to be able to compete and get out there like the UFC? Okay, you got Bellator, who will start on Spike in about a year. You've got two companies in the IFL and Pro Elite that both dropped $50 million, give or take, trying to be the UFC. You've got no other organization other than the UFC breaking down barriers of legalities and opening up countries and states to allow other smaller organizations or upcoming organizations to have shows and provide entertainment and provide income to the great fighters out there and the upcoming, good fighters that are putting their blood, sweat, and tears on the line. Be thankful that the UFC bought Strikeforce. Be thankful they have an attitude that competition breeds success and success breeds competition, so they're going to be able to compete with themselves in that manner. So be happy about the fact, and remember one thing. It was only 8 years ago that you were maybe lucky to see 6 shows a year. I remember when it was 2 or 3. Okay?
Right.
Now you have 32 UFCs and 6 Strikeforces planned, or give or take. Okay? What's the complaint about? Because if the UFC wasn't behind it with all the money, then you're not going to have fighters have a chance to make money. These other organizations, I think there's about 200 small organizations around the country. But with all respect to all of them, and I want all of them to make money and be successful, but how many of them do you think are ever going to even get near a 50th of what the UFC does for the sport of MMA? They don't have the money, bro. They'll make their money, they'll pour it in the next event, but nobody has, maybe Viacom with Bellator might throw out a little bit of money, maybe. But nobody has, in my opinion, the millions of dollars it takes to get us into Madison Square Garden. The millions of dollars it takes to be able to market out there to bring new eyeballs to the sport. So let them control it. Let them control 85% of the fighters. That's not a monopoly. That just was thrown off the table. That's called good, solid, damn business.
Yeah.
Period.
Agreed.
So do you want to ride with success, or do you want to see people open up and try to compete and fail? What's worse for our sport? For people to see people failing, or for people to see people succeeding?
I couldn't agree more.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, it's all simple stuff. It's so simple. I read about some of this stuff and it's like, come on, guys, please. But just look at it logistically. Everything in life should be looked at simply, not complicated. It's just simple math. That's all it is.
Give me one fighter that's going to come up and shock us anytime now. I know a couple of years back, I remember watching John Jones have his first fight and thinking, man, this guy is something right here. Who's the next John Bones Jones?
Well, I called John Jones. I told him and he knows this too because he was on my show, and I told him, I said, you're going to be the Muhammad Ali of MMA in about 5 years. Not now, because you're half of what you're going to be, but in 5 years. You play your cards right, both in and out of the octagon, you could be the greatest of all time. Up and coming, there's a number up and coming. You know, I mean, Jose Aldo is possibly pound for pound. He possibly could be the best fighter in MMA. You know, potentially at this point right now. But as far as new, we just saw one Saturday night. I want to see what's going to go on with Stephen Thompson, the karate guy that came in.
Yeah.
I mean, I honestly, except for Condit against Diaz, I mean, the kicks this guy was throwing and Condit's kicks are somewhat similar, but there's a difference with this kid. I don't know what his ground game's like, but you might see some interesting stuff coming out of it. There's so many good fighters out there up and coming. There really is. The Brazilians they're really coming on strong.
Is anyone going to knock off Anderson Silva anytime soon?
Wait, anybody going to knock off what?
Anderson Silva.
Well, the fight I'm waiting for, and if it ever happens, is John Jones and Anderson Silva. I think that's when you're going to see it happen. But that's got to happen in the next year or two because Anderson may want to. You know, Anderson could turn around and just say he wants to retire at some point.
Yeah. His win streak is ridiculous right now.
I got a question for you about Joe Rogan. This is someone else that's a big fan of yours. He said, hey, I hear Joe Rogan has a black belt. Even if it's true, I still think you can take him. What are your thoughts?
Joe Rogan is one tough monkey. So I'll tell you, Joe would probably grab me, put me down on the ground, tie me up like a pretzel, and then we'd wind up having a beer afterwards. If we stood up and started striking at each other, then that's probably the shot that I would have. But Joe, don't kid yourself. Be happy about the fact that Joe is not only so extremely knowledgeable about everything that we're seeing in the octagon, but the training that Joe's been through and the training he's ongoing. He's highly skilled. He's freakishly strong. He's a freakish athlete, and very passionate about this whole thing. And nobody could ever convince me that Joe's not one tough monkey because I know he is. So,
is there any other future projects that you have coming up?
Any future projects?
Yeah, anything else you have in store that you want to let your fans know about?
Yeah, I've got a number of products that are going to be coming out over the next year, but the big one that's going to come up in June is I'm finally getting my own app, and it's taking about 4 months to put together. It's going to cost a good amount of money, but you'll be able to have an alarm. You can download the alarm clock, my voice waking you up in various ways on the iPhone. There'll be an iPhone app, and there'll be a bunch of other stuff coming up. And I also do wedding and birthday recordings, which I've done about 45 or 50 weddings in the last 5 months, where people call and
you guys see John's face right now.
It's kind of like this, they're walking into the wedding party, and it's like walking down the aisle of love forever, and then give them a big, grandiose introduction. And they're posting them on YouTube, and they're just, you know what? It's a very little bit of money I charge, and I've been paid a lot more for these things, but I made it really inexpensive. But what really makes it for me is when the couples write back on how incredible it made their day.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, totally is. Guys, I gotta get running here because my show's coming on in 45 minutes.
We were just wrapping it up with that one. That's good timing, huh? Hey,
all right. Well, listen. You can follow me on Twitter at Bruce Buffer, or check out my website at bufferzone.net. You can write me for anything there, from recordings to you name it, and my office will answer back.
Bruce, thank you so much. I will definitely be keeping in contact with you. Thank you so much for this interview, man, and best of luck to all your future projects.
Thanks, guys. You take care. And
all right.
Thanks for all the support.
Thanks,
no problem,
Bruce.
man. It's a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
See ya.